Hello and welcome. We're going to start talking about Chapter 3 today from your textbook. And basically, Chapter 3 talks about markets. We think kind of intuitively know what a market is. We're going to think about it in depth. And there may be some interesting things that maybe you haven't thought about that are part of a market as we go through this. So first of all, academic definition of a market. All the potential buyers for a product or service, and we can define that market by the product or service. We can define it by a particular kind of customer, or we can define it geographically, and there are actually other ways to define too, but those are the primary large ways to define markets. So it might be the market in the United States for a male grooming product. So we've now defined the customer as male, the geography is the United States, and it's a grooming product. That would be a market definition. In order to enter a market or continue to serve a market, we have to understand what that market is, and markets change all the time. So people who are marketing products or services have to examine their market not just once, but constantly or periodically to determine what's happening in the market and what's changing in the market. And the better we understand what the market is, the better we are able to serve that market with our product. So we need to know what the market needs, what the behaviors and attitudes of the participants in the market are. So that's kind of what market analysis is all about. Another definition, market share. Those of you who've had various accounting and finance courses know what the definition of market share is. It's pretty simple. It's my percentage of an overall market. So once you've defined the market, you can say, what share do I hold in that market? So it depends on the definition as to how much share you own. The market share of, let's say, Subaru Outback could be defined as the market share in the total personal transportation market, so all automobiles and other kinds of personal transportation. Could be just their share in the automobile market, or it could be their share in the small SUV market, which is sort of what an Outback is, an all-wheel drive small SUV. So you could look at market share in the bigger definition of market, or you could look at market share in the targeted market, the small SUV market. So it depends on how you define the market as to what percentage of the market you have. This is important, these definitions or levels of types of markets. So we talked about the potential market. All customers who may be interested in a particular offering, that's potential. So this is everybody who's interested. Available, people who are interested and have enough resources to purchase the product. So they have to have enough income and have the product available to them. So if we don't have distribution in certain places, then the potential market isn't really going to be attained. It's just the available market. So potential, highest level, second level, available, third level, qualified available. Do they have the ability to buy based on legal requirements or ability to use the product? So easy example here is alcohol. 15-year-olds may be very interested in the offering of beer. Let's say, so if you look up at potential market, there are customers who might be interested in that offering, but they are not qualified to buy beer, at least in this geographic market in the US, until they're 21. So they're not qualified to buy based on age because of a legal requirement. Obviously, there are other qualifications. You might be interested in a car but not have a driver's license. Well, I guess you could buy the car, but it's not going to be particularly useful to you if you can't drive it. So the available market, qualified available market, target market, that's the people that you're targeting with your product. So who is it within this qualified available market that we're going to target. And then the final category, the penetrated market, that's people who are already buying my product or service. So this is the people that I've already succeeded in making them a customer. So think about those 5 levels. It's important to know those 5 levels, because when people talk about markets, you have to know what market they're talking about. When you're analyzing markets, you need to know some stuff. Oops, what happened to my picture there? Hold on 1 second. We just lost all the light in the picture. Not sure why. Just a second here. Not sure what's going on there. I guess we'll just have to deal with me in the dark. Don't really need to see me if you can't see me, right? So at any rate, information needs include who, what, where, when, why, and how. So who's qualified and interested in my product? What exactly are they interested in? Where do they need it? When do they need it? Why are they interested? And how are they going to acquire it? So those are all important information about any product. It doesn't matter what kind of a product you're talking about. You need to know those facts. So the who is probably the thing we'll spend the most time on. The who of a consumer market is the cultural, social, and personal pieces of that who. So what kind of a cultural background does my consumer market have? What social influences are on them, and what personal influences? I'm going to pause for a second and see if I can fix this picture. So I changed the orientation of the picture, the camera a little bit, so it's not looking at the bright windows, even though the shades are pulled. I guess they're too bright. So we're talking about cultural, social, and personal analysis of the who's in my market, the people in my market, and or the businesses in my market. So cultural considerations. When we're thinking about cultural considerations, most markets, in most places, there's a dominant culture and there are subcultures. So the dominant culture in the state of Maine is, at least in my estimation, it's relatively white, Anglo-Saxon. It has probably some cultural features, at least accepted cultural features, whether they're true or not, that people are independent, that they're pretty hardworking, that they have the ability to do it themselves. Things like that are part of the dominant culture in Maine, but there are lots of subcultures. There is certainly a strong French culture in Maine, which is defined both by religion and maybe to a certain extent language, and certainly ethnic background, obviously. There's a Somali population in Lewiston, obviously quite different from your white Anglo-Saxon population. It's the dominant culture. Subcultures usually work very hard to preserve their identity because they're in a minority. So generally speaking, they are very proud of their culture and want to preserve it, which means that they work hard at doing so. Teach their kids the language, whatever the language be, make sure that the various cultural traits get followed. So subcultures can be religion, ethnic background. You can have lifestyle subcultures. So the gay subculture, or a straight subculture, or a single versus a family subculture. All sorts of different kind of lifestyle subcultures, and obviously regional subcultures. Many of you are in different parts of the country. Different places have different cultures, subcultures. So we have a whole overall U.S. culture, but then which is the dominant culture in the US, but then we have regional cultures in places like the Northeast or Texas or California, or I think somebody's up there in Kansas City. I think one of you is in Kansas City. I'm sure the culture there is different from the culture here in Maine. And then you have also urban cultures and rural cultures, which also are quite strong. Just as a background, I can tell you that when I moved to Maine, it was a bigger cultural change for me, having spent most of my life in and around Boston, than working in France, which I did for several years. When I was working in France, I was working in an urban culture that was not that different from the Boston culture. They spoke a different language, their food was a little different, but their work culture and their communication culture was very similar to what I was used to working in Boston. When I moved to Maine, I had to sort of change my style and attitude. I couldn't be that type A city slicker who wants things done right now and talks really fast. I still talk really fast, can't help that, but um, I had to change and I had to adapt to a new culture. It was quite different, and it's not because of anything other than, at least I believe, the difference is primarily the difference between an urban culture and a rural culture. The final thing in cultures is class. So you've got various economic class status. So you've got wealthy people and poor people and people in between. You've got white collar people and blue collar people. Those are class structure differences. And persons who are in the same class often exhibit similar behaviors. Part of the culture of that class. Sort of an interesting subset of that is when people change socioeconomic status in the course of their lives, they usually stay with the cultural attitudes of the class that they started in. So if you take a sort of a wealthy person, a child of a wealthy family who has grown up in that class, white collar elite class, let's say that in their generation the wealth goes away, so the wealth isn't there anymore, they still have the behavior patterns of that class, and vice versa. Someone blue collar, grown up in a blue collar kind of social class, does well economically, often still has the same behavior patterns that a blue collar that they came from. So that a lot of times that cultural piece stays as people move up and down economically. So you can't just look at their income to figure out what behavior is. Kinds of things that influence people, certainly family members, parents, wives, children have a big influence on people's behavior. Our parents certainly have a large influence on us when we're young. Maybe that fades a little bit as we get older. Friends, peer pressure in the adolescent group is quite high, and I'm sure you all remember being in middle school and high school, how important it was to be accepted and be part and parcel with your friends. So there was a lot of pressure to do what your friends did, and that's a normal thing that happens in adolescence, but it certainly influences people. So if we're talking about understanding what influences people, we need to understand that peer pressure part. And it certainly continues as we get older. It's just not quite as strong. People we work with have significant influences on our behavior. If we have religious affiliations, those affiliations have significant influences on our behavior. And then affinity groups, people who do things that we do. So if we're a skier, we have an affinity group with other skiers. If we're a tennis player, we have affinity groups with other tennis players. If we're a diver, we're going to have an affinity group with other people who dive or climb. So that I'm talking about recreational affinity groups. There can be other kinds of affinity groups as well. If we're a weaver, we have an affinity group with other weavers. So those affinity groups have influence over us. They influence some of our behaviors. As far as marketing goes, consumers are often influenced by opinion leaders, often within their affinity groups or their religious groups or their work groups as adults. So as a marketer, if you can influence opinion leaders, those opinion leaders often can have an influence over lots of people. And in the age of social media, those opinion leaders perhaps have even more influence. But think about it: if you're let's say a rock climber, and the best rock climber in your group or your affinity group likes to use a certain kind of climbing shoe, then you're probably going to consider that climbing shoe, that brand or that model, because this person who you really respect, you respect his or her ability, is using this shoe, so you're going to respect that. And the same goes all the way up to celebrity endorsements. When a celebrity of one sort or another endorses something, that's actually, they're an opinion leader. If they're using it, it must be good. I respect them as a singer or a sports player or whatever it is. So therefore, if for instance, if a basketball player is wearing this kind of shoe, it must be a good shoe. It's making, they play so well, maybe the shoe has something to do with it. So I'm going to consider that shoe. I'm going to be influenced towards that shoe. So that's what opinion leaders do. And when we talk about marketing, we're often trying to influence opinion leaders. And then if the opinion leaders are influenced, they'll influence people who identify with them. Personal factors that you're going to look at, family life cycle. So that's, where are you right now? You're single, you're married with children, and a mortgage. Your children are grown, you're an empty nester. All of those are family life cycle questions, and very important questions for marketers to know about. Go back to my own experience again. When I was in the ski business, we had customers in their 20s, and then they disappeared until they were 40 or 45. So there weren't many customers in the ski business in their 30s. Where did they go? Well, they got married, they had children, they had mortgages, they had jobs that they were climbing the corporate ladder. Perhaps they were working very hard, they were working a lot of hours, and they had family responsibilities and financial responsibilities. Skiing's an expensive sport, and it's a time-consuming sport. It takes days or weekends, especially if you're living in an urban area like Boston and you're 3, 4, 5 hours from the nearest mountains. So it's a whole day or maybe a whole weekend experience, and it's expensive if you're paying for yourself and family members. So pretty unattainable in your 30s. So you've made other commitments and you drop it. And then as you become more prosperous, your kids get older and they can do it, you tend to come back to the sport. So we saw that all the time as a pattern in family life cycle. So when we were targeting our communication message, we were trying to target the single people or 40, 45-year-old people. We didn't even try with the 30s because most of them were just not available to purchase the kind of stuff we were selling. Type of lifestyle: do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a house? Do you travel a lot? Do you stay home? Are you going out to clubs every night, or are you a homebody? All of those lifestyle kinds of questions are important to understand. And then, how are you made up psychologically? Are you introvert or an extrovert? Are you cautious or not cautious, risk taker or a cautious person? All of those kinds of psychological things. Psychographic characteristics: what motivates you? How do you perceive things? What kind of attitudes you have? So you can see that there's just a mass of information. You can't get it all. Some of it's more important than others, and it depends on the kind of product you're selling as to how important it is and what it's worth to attain. If you go back to some of these cultural considerations, you can get that information from census bureaus and things like that. Social considerations, especially Religious affiliations and work affiliations are fairly available from various databases. Somewhere in here I had income, I thought. Socioeconomic status, that's perhaps one of the easiest ones to get. The US Census data has incredible data down to zip code level on socioeconomic status. So lots of places to get this information. You got to decide what's useful and what's not. Let's stop there and break it here, and then we'll come back after you've answered a few questions, and we'll talk about some of the same information relative to selling to business or analyzing business markets, business to business markets. Thanks a lot.